I declare war. So I'm back on the war path. And I'm going to tell you why I'm back on the war path. Yesterday, I was listening to O'Shea Duke Jackson's live stream. He had this guy on his show by the name of Anthony Brian Logan. And they were talking about this undercover white supremacist who was a teacher at a school. And their discussion really sparked my interest. You know, it really made me decide to go check out this guy, Anthony Brian Logan's channel, and actually watch his video commentary on that particular issue. Because, you know, it inspired me to check him out because he was saying some outlandish and silly things during that podcast or live stream on O'Shea's channel. And before I even checked out O'Shea's channel, you know, I got a comment from Doug, and shout out to Doug. He's in the comment section now. He's in the chat room. Shout out to you. Yeah, so he told me about this podcast. He told me that this guy, Anthony Brian Logan, would be on O'Shea's channel. And also O'Shea basically reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in talking about this matter. And because of my schedule, I wasn't able to get on the podcast, but I want to take out time now to address some of the things that this guy, Anthony Brian Logan, had to say. Now, for those people who are unfamiliar with this guy and his channel, he's one of these black conservatives who basically panders to white people, panders to right-wing conservatives. That's what his channel is all about. And he made some crazy comments regarding this white supremacist teacher. And just to provide you all with some background information, I'm going to share my screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the audio from this guy's video. I'm not going to actually play the video. I will show the actual I will share my screen so that people can see the actual name of the video. And also I will include a link to that video in the description box so that people could check it out for themselves. But first, let me share the story for those of you who aren't familiar with the story. I'm going to share my screen. Just bear with me a second. And I'm going to run through some of the key points of the story before I really get into my response to this guy. Because it's just absolutely ridiculous. You know it's bad when even O'Shea Duke Jackson is going against you in your position, when even O'Shea Duke Jackson is calling you out, when even some Republicans, some conservatives are calling you out. I mean, on this live stream that he did with O'Shea, you had people basically saying, man, quit tap dancing, man. They didn't say it quite like that, but that's basically what they were trying to say, because this guy was tap dancing around the issue of what is white supremacy. All right, so let me share my screen real quick so that you all can know exactly what story I'm talking about. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so here's the story about a Florida teacher who basically led a double life. She was a teacher by day, and then when she was off of her job, she held or maintained a white supremacist podcast, and also she had a racist Twitter account. And as is pointed out in this video right here, and I'm not going to play it because I don't want to deal with copyright issues, but you had a parent who was complaining about the fact that this particular teacher somehow suggested this segregation was a good thing. So that's what prompted some teachers' concerns. And sadly, when they went to the principal to report this, the principal basically went and talked to the teacher and said, should I have any concerns? And the teacher basically said no. And the principal basically just brushed it off. That was the end of it. There was no action taken. The only time this school eventually took action is when the Huffington Post came out with this expose calling out this teacher. So they were forced to suspend her, and I think that she was eventually fired. But this woman has a racist or had a racist podcast, and her name is Dayanna Volitich, and she was a teacher at Crystal River Middle School, and she had a personality, a separate account on Twitter where she used a pseudonym, and she was basically spewing a lot of racism online. So in her podcast, she made statements suggesting that Black people were less intelligent than white people. And I'm not going to go on, she said, but that's basically what it boils down to. This woman talked about how she would interject her political beliefs into the classroom and then try to cover it up when administrators came to her classroom. She basically told her students ahead of time that she would be acting different when these administrators were around. Asked the kids to basically play along with this, and they said okay, as pointed out in this article. And this article shows some of her racist tweets right here, as you can see. And I'm going to go back to these tweets because this guy, Anthony Brian Logan, talks about these tweets, and he tries to explain away these tweets, and he tries to excuse these tweets and, try to justify these tweets. And you're going to hear this. You're going to hear his mental gymnastics. This guy going out of his way, bending over backwards in order to pacify and please his predominantly white audience. And despite his claims during this hangout with O'Shea about his audience being diverse, about his audience not being predominantly white, all you have to do is look at the comment section to his video. And this is his video right here. This is his channel, Anthony Brian Logan. And all you have to do is go to the comment section, and you will see that most of these people, and I will include a link to this video so you can check it out for yourself. But if you look at the comment section, you will see that most of these people are white. Most of these people showering him with praise for cooning and tap dancing, buck dancing, and just doing a Sambo routine. Most of these people are white. And I'm just going to scroll through this a little bit more, and then I'm going to get back to the story. But as you can see, most of these people are white. And that's no coincidence. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Black people that are in this comment section are actually white people posing as Black. But you will see here that over 80% of these people in this comment section are white. And it's just a shame to see a Black man go through all these efforts, putting on a virtual minstrel show for these white folks. It's a shame, man. And this is why people don't have much respect for many of these Black conservatives, because instead of being conservatives, they are conservatives, serving their white daddy, tap dancing for their white daddy, saying what they feel their white daddy will be happy to hear, for a couple of dog biscuits and a pat on the head. Just like a dog, a watchdog serves his master. That's how this guy, Anthony Brian Logan, behaves. But you get the point. You see that most of these people are white. That's who he panders to. That's his audience. That's his base. That is the only way you can explain all the cooning and tap dancing that this Negro does in his video. But you have all these comments. Like, here's one comment from this woman's racist Twitter account where she says, is it supremacy or hateful to prefer your own people over others? She says, America's education system is designed to enable victimization when teachers are forced to learn about institutional racism and prove it's real when it isn't. This woman is denying that institutional racism exists. She goes on to say, I literally feel brain cells dying as I read this bullshit. And this is an article right here, this in this picture, about confronting racism in classrooms. And she's referring to confronting racism as bullshit. And then this woman goes on to say, white privilege, prove to me that it exists. Show me statistics that prove white benefits economically solely because of their race. And then she goes on. And then there's this podcast right here where she's basically talking about infiltrating the schools, about white supremacists infiltrating the schools to spew their hatred and to indoctrinate young people with white supremacist beliefs, to essentially poison the minds of young people. And in this podcast, they reference Red Ice TV, and they talk about how we need people, how there are many people that support Red Ice TV on the low or, covertly. And they were basically saying that some of those people need to go into the schools. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Red Ice TV, which I wasn't familiar with until I heard about this, but here's an example of this kind of stuff that they put out. Here you have this video right here talking about diversity is a weapon against white people. That is common white supremacist talking points. That is a common theme that many of these white supremacists have in their ideology and in their propaganda. But you actually had this tap dancing Negro right here trying to explain away this stuff. And we're going to go through it. I'm going to play the audio and I'm going to respond as we play the audio. And, just in case YouTube wants to get funny, and try to take this down for some copyright and stuff, the fact of the matter is this comes under fair use. I am commenting about political matters, and that's the only purpose of me using parts of this guy's content. And that is allowable under the Fair Use Act. And at this point, like I've really had it with YouTube, because what YouTube is doing, what they have been doing is they have been, let me stop sharing my screen for a minute. But basically what they've been doing, and I'll get to your comments in a section, YouTube is taking away my monetization on this channel. They had these new rules where you had to have a certain number of hours of views and stuff like that in order to maintain your partnership. They say you have to have like 4,000 hours of viewing time within the last 12 months in order to be able to have your channel monetized and all that kind of stuff, in order to have super chat and all that kind of stuff. And the fact of the matter is I haven't been regularly posting on this channel because I've been focused on producing my own content on my I Declare War channel. So I'm back on it, man. I'm back on the case. I will be posting more content over here. And the reason why I brought that whole thing up is because YouTube is on some BS, man. They are selective in how they enforce their rules. They're selective in how they apply, the monetization and demonetization. They're very selective in that area. And they're selective about enforcing these copyright rules. But hopefully, I should be able to proceed with this by playing the audio because, again, this comes under fair use. And before I get started with that, I want to shout out the people in the chat room real quick. I'm going to go through your comments real quick now. And then I'm going to share the screen to this guy, Anthony Brian Logan's page, so you can actually know the title of his video and actually, see it for yourself. But I'm not going to play the video. I'm going to play the audio from the video on my phone. And shout out to Doug again, because he's the one that really brought this to my attention. Like, he's been mentioning this guy. And a while ago, I was on a live stream with O'Shea, and he was doing an interviewing me or whatever. And this guy, Anthony Brian Logan, mentioned that he was interested in a debate with me. And, I'll be happy to debate him or anybody else for that matter about anything. You know, the thing is, I reached out to him after he expressed his interest in having a debate with me. He didn't respond. And that's good, man. But the fact of the matter is, I think he's punkified, man. I don't think he has what it takes to debate me. And I would welcome the opportunity to debate him live. And, you know, I encourage y'all to reach out to him and let him know that the challenge is here. So, you know, I'm not one that just likes to do response videos. I would rather confront somebody face to face, man to man, and have an exchange, an intelligent dialogue. So let's get into it. I'm going to show the show his video. I'm not going to play it again. I'm just going to show it as I play the audio on my phone and respond to the audio as we go along. So if you could bear with me a second. Okay, so I'm going to play the audio in 1 second. First, I have to make sure I'm at the right point in the video. 1 second. Just bear with me 1 second, y'all. 1 second. So once I get to the right place, before I play it, I'll go to your comments and just respond to those real quick and then get into it. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so I'm going to respond to your comments and then I'm going to get into playing his audio and responding to what he has to say. Again, shout out to Doug, shout out to New Shizzle. Yeah, New Shizzle said, it's hard when the enemy is your own people. Yeah, I mean, it is hard when you have your own people actually co-signing a white supremacist. I mean, I can't understand that. I can't understand how any black man in their right mind would go out of their way to defend a white supremacist. That tells you how thoroughly brainwashed our people are. And when you listen to the mental gymnastics that this guy does, you will see that this guy is doing nothing but pandering. You will see that this guy is doing nothing but cooning. And it's a shame. And Mr. Biggs, Mr. Bullet Club Biggs said that Anthony Brian Logan is a buck dancing coon. Agreed. Exactly, I agree. KD84 said that Sambo is a fool, but white supremacists benefit the system. You know, it's crumbling. And Master Shock Value said I had to unsubscribe from that fool. He was getting on my nerves. Doug says ABL likes to play semantics. Exactly. And you all will hear that. You all will hear this guy try to play semantics with the definition of white supremacy. And again, you know, O'Shea and, you know, his guests called him out on that, man. Called him out on him playing all these games with definitions. Shout out to Simply Deep 1985. Oh, I see Doug said I could play the audio without any issues from YouTube. Okay, I hope that's true. Yeah, I see Big says that YouTube is screwing over small content creators and targeting black YouTubers. Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing about that. I heard that Harvey's main channel got shut down and he had to you know, use his other channel, you know, and I hope more people subscribe to him, and I'm sure he'll get back up to his numbers that he was at. But yeah, I've been hearing a lot about that. Yeah, so basically everybody's going in on this guy, Anthony Brian Logan. Um, and Big says that Anthony Brian Logan was hardcore pandering during the NFL season about the national anthem protest. Now, I just recently discovered this guy's channel, so I wasn't aware of that, but I'm sure that sounds about right. Like, if this one video is an indication of where this guy is politically, then I would not be surprised that he would be pandering, you know, and attacking Black people for standing up. But let's play this audio. And again, I'm going to share my screen real quick so you all can see, you know, just the name of his video. I'm not playing the actual video, just playing the audio. So let's share the screen. Okay, so I'm going to play the audio, and as I play it, I'm going to stop it at certain points to provide my commentary. And what I'll do is I'll go back to the chat room. I can't have the chat room up while I'm doing this, but I will get to your comments.
Article and see what she was talking about in the podcast. She had a Twitter, and that's been deleted, so I can't go back to the Twitter. But you saw the video before I started talking, and they got into some of what was said, but we're going to get into more. And you see the headline right over my left-hand shoulder. Exclusive Florida public school teacher has a white nationalist podcast. Now, I've not heard this podcast before, but from what I've been able to hear in that video we saw before I started talking, and what I've just skimmed through in this article, that's not really what it is. She's just like your typical kind of a little bit beyond sending the right person on Twitter. That's basically.
Okay, so this guy says that this is not really a white supremacist podcast, and basically he's implying that she's not a white nationalist, she's not a white supremacist, she's just a quote-unquote center-right person on Twitter. Let's go to the definition of white supremacist. As indicated in the dictionary, a white supremacist is a person who believes that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races. That's the definition of white supremacist. All we have to do is go to her comment about IQ, and we will see that, you know, her comments about IQ and basically suggesting that Black people are less intelligent than white people, you know, citing this information about how, and I'm just going to read the excerpt from this article real quick that deals with this IQ issue. And this is just one example of white supremacy. So this article points out how a guest railed against diversity in schools, dismissing the idea that a kid from Nigeria and a kid from Sweden are supposed to learn exactly the same and have the same IQ. Volitich enthusiastically agreed with the guest and went on to argue that science has proven that certain races are smarter than others. So this suggests that white people are more intelligent than Black people. If that is not white supremacy, I don't know what is. And then, you know, this article just points out other things, and we'll discuss the other things in this article in response to some of these comments this guy makes. So let's continue on.
Simply what this was, and for that she got fired. Put it to you like this. If it was a white person saying that, let's say it was me and I was a teacher, and I said the same thing she said about Black folks, then it would be nothing. It would be totally innocuous, but because she's white, it's an issue. But
so I have to address that. So basically, this guy is trying to suggest that the only reason why this is an issue is because this woman is white. If this had been a Black person, as he's saying, you know, there would be no issue and this person wouldn't be suspended from the school. All you have to do I mean, is look at one example. And that example is the situation involving irritated Jeannie. And I'm going to Google this real quick. Irritated Jeannie. And it should come up. Just bear with me a second. So if you all are familiar with Irritated Genie, you know that he was fired from his job after it came out that he had a podcast, or he had a program where he dealt with a lot of race issues. You know, he used to work with the Department of Homeland Security. And from what I understand, he got fired after this came out. So this notion that somehow Black people are being treated differently than white people, or they're allowed to have certain types of views and hold certain types of key positions, is complete nonsense. This is one example of many that completely debunks this idea. And also, you know, I want to point out that all this guy is doing is basically pandering to these people. He's trying to make these white people appear to be victims, you know, despite the fact that these conservatives constantly complain about people having a victim mentality. In their minds, it's okay for white people to be the victims, you know, the white people to be victims of a system that's unfairly stacked against them, when the fact of the matter is white people are dominant in this culture. You know, this culture is a culture of white privilege, a culture that nurtures white people at the expense of all other people. But yet this guy, this tap dancing minstrel, wants to pretend like this woman is being victimized because of her race, when in fact she is the one victimizing those students by teaching them hatred, by teaching them white supremacy, by instilling in them, for instance, the idea that segregation was good, as this parent pointed out in that Huffington Post article. And I would play the video from that article if I didn't have to deal with the copyright issues. But let's continue on with his commentary.
But we're going to get into it and see what she says. Her name is Dayanna Volitich, and the subhead under the headline says she suggests Muslims be eradicated from the earth, believes anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and teaches middle school social studies. Now, I'm almost 100% certain, because we are on Huffington Post, I'm almost 100% certain that's a exaggeration. It's not really telling the full truth.
And, you know, the notion that just because it's the Huffington Post, that means that everything is false in the Huffington Post, I mean, that is preposterous. I mean, that is a classic example of someone using an ad hominem attack, where instead of attacking the points being raised, what they do is they attack the person or thing raising the points. So here, instead of actually coming with proof to rebut those assertions, he attacks the Huffington Post. You know, he attacks the credibility of the Huffington Post without presenting any evidence disproving their assertions. But let's continue on.
But we're going to get down to the bottom of it. Okay, now, we have an update on this. It says that she got removed from the classroom. So I'm not sure what that means. Did she get fired? Did she get reassigned? I'm not really sure. Because you got teachers' unions, it's kind of hard to fire some people sometimes, depending upon what happens and depending upon the state, I suppose. On Friday, March 2nd, 2018, the Citrus County School District was made aware by a HuffPost reporter of a concerning podcast. The HMO said in a statement, the Human Resources Department was notified and investigation was initiated immediately. The teacher has been removed from the classroom. Investigation is ongoing. So I guess until the investigation completes, she won't be in the classroom. She'll be at home, still getting paid, but she won't be able to teach students. And that's her right there again. She's like a nice lady, but we're going to see what's really going on.
He said she's like a nice lady. She looks like a nice lady. Man, it's something else with this guy, man. Let's play his stuff. Hold on.
And her pseudonym was Tiana Dalichov, and that Twitter, like I said, is gone. Now, here's the original article. Dayanna Volitich, a 25-year-old social studies teacher at Crystal River Middle School in Florida, has been secretly hosting the white nationalist podcast Unapologetic under the pseudonym Tiana Dalichov and bragging about teaching her views in the public school, HuffPost has discovered. In the most recent podcast, February 26, a guest railed against diversity in schools, dismissing the idea that, quote, a kid from Nigeria and a kid who came from Sweden are supposed to learn exactly the same and have the same IQ. Well, let's stop right there. Everybody knows that if you come from Sweden versus Nigeria, it could be different. It's different countries. It's very far away, different cultures, different regions. It's not the same. So to say that is factually correct. And also about the IQ, you could look at the IQ on average. Sub-Saharan Africans have different IQ than whites, and whites are different than Asians. And it goes in that order. Asians, whites, Sub-Saharan Africans. It is what it is. It doesn't mean that just because you're black, your IQ will be low, or if you're Asian, your IQ will be high. It just means on average, the IQs are going to be different. Now we can get into.
Okay, so I want to address that point. I mean, first of all, this guy is essentially trying to make excuses for this white supremacist suggesting that black people are less intelligent than white people. That's what you basically have here in his commentary. And it's a shame that you actually have a Negro making these arguments, defending white supremacy, defending the notion that black people are less intelligent than white people. It's completely absurd. I mean, he cites these, this information about these IQ tests. First of all, IQ tests were created by these white people. These tests serve the interests of white people. These tests are culturally biased. You know, the people collecting these stats and the people evaluating these tests, these people aren't concerned with, finding out how intelligent people are. That's not their objective. These people have an agenda, and it's to make black people appear to be less intelligent. That's the bottom line. And a score on an IQ test is not necessarily a reflection of how intelligent somebody is. Culture goes into that, changes and, cultural values are part of this test. So the more somebody is assimilated into this Western world and Western way of thinking, the more, that they probably score on these tests. So I don't see these test scores as any indication of how intelligent people are. It's no indication that black people are less intelligent than these white people. But this is a common talking point used by these white supremacists to reinforce the notion that white people are superior. And it's a damn shame that you have this buck dancing house Negro helping to further and promote those types of racist arguments against his own people. But let's continue on.
To the reasons why, that can be a debate, but the numbers are what they are, and they can't really be disproven. Some may say that IQ is not really important, but it is what it is. But let's continue. Volitich enthusiastically agreed with the guest and went on to argue that, quote, science, unquote, has proven that certain races are smarter than others. Now, I want to hear what she actually said. If anybody has this podcast, let me see it. I've not.
And this guy says he wants to hear what she actually said, but later on in this video, he actually shows the link to the podcast because it's a part of this article that he has featured in his screenshot. So if he wanted to hear it, he could have just played it. And he actually does at some point play it, but then he cuts it off. He doesn't play it all. But the bottom line is this. These people actually think that they are smarter than black people. They actually believe that black people are less intelligent than they are. And it's a shame that you actually have, people, for instance, like a Tariq Nasheed, who actually forms his mouth to say that white supremacists are the smartest people on the planet, reinforcing their idea of supremacy. But let's continue on.
I've been able to find it. I haven't looking that long, of course. I just did this video right now. But if you have that podcast, let me get a listen, and then I'll maybe do a follow-up on this. In the same episode, Volitich boasted about bringing her white nationalist beliefs into the classroom and hiding her ideology from administrators. She said that when parents complained to the school's principal about how she is injecting political bias into the classroom, Volitich lied to the principal and said it was not true. Quote, she believed me and backed off, she said. Volitich also agreed that her guest's assertion that more white supremacists need to infiltrate public schools and become teachers. They don't have to be vocal about their views, but get in there, her guest said. Be more covert and just start taking over those places. Let's back up a little bit here where she was talking about hiding her ideology, white nationalist beliefs. See, I feel like Huffington Post is assigning a certain thing to her without her saying that herself. You can have certain political views and not necessarily label it. Huffington Post, I feel like it's labeling what she is. She said that she wants.
Now, him saying that, basically suggesting that the Huffington Post is like mislabeling her or, exaggerating, her statements speak for themselves. All those quotes that are in that article that you can read for yourself, all those tweets tell you who this woman is. They tell you that this is a white supremacist. They tell you that this is a racist. So there's no need for him to try to dismiss the labels that Huffington Post applies to this woman. If there wasn't an issue with what this woman had to say, the school wouldn't have suspended her and eventually fired her. The fact of the matter is you had a racist, a white supremacist in the classroom teaching hate to the children, basically teaching them to believe that white people are superior, to support the idea that segregation is something positive. That's what this teacher was teaching them, poisoning the minds of those young people. But yet you had this guy trying to downplay the significance of this story and of this situation. But let's continue on with his audio.
To have the other side be heard. So does it mean that the other side has to be white supremacists or white nationalists, or can it just be an opposing viewpoint from the liberal rhetoric that we hear all the time? See,
this is not just an opposing viewpoint. This is not a situation of Republicans versus Democrats. This is a situation of white supremacists versus everybody else. And we're going to go into like his defense of each one of these tweets, and the tweets that I showed you before tell you exactly who this woman is. It tells you that she is a hate monger. It tells you that she is a racist, a white supremacist. I don't know what else you need to see in order to understand who this woman is. But this guy, he is not sincere in his statements. This guy's whole platform is dedicated to pandering. It's dedicated to tap dancing. It's dedicated to shoe shining. It's dedicated to ass kissing. This guy is nothing but a house Negro sellout coon. That's what he is. But let's finish playing his audio.
Signing, like if you happen to not be liberal, if you're not on the left, then you must be a white supremacist or racist or whatever. That's pretty much what I'm getting from this article. But then again, I've not heard the particular thing in question that they're referring to. They're not like posting a snippet of audio and describing it right here in this article. But
now he says that they're not posting a snippet of this article, of the audio or whatever. He claims that that's the case. But later on, again, in this video, he shows you the clip from the podcast, even though he doesn't play it all. He shows you the tweets that this woman has issued on her hate-filled Twitter account. He shows you this stuff. So what is he talking about when he says that there's no basis for these labels to be applied to this woman? He shows you all of this. And if this woman was not a hate monger, if this woman was not a racist, if this woman was not a white supremacist, and she was just some center-right person, as this guy is suggesting, if she was just your run-of-the-mill conservative, then why did this become a controversy? If that was the case, why did she shut down her Twitter account once she got discovered? If that was the case, why did she shut down her podcast when she got discovered? If she was just the run-of-the-mill Republican, if she was just some quote-unquote center-right person, she wouldn't have shut down all her social media. She wouldn't have done that. And the school certainly would not have suspended her from her job for being a Republican.
But I think I'm right. After HuffPost made inquiries about Volitich's white nationalism to the Citrus County School District on Friday, Tiana Dalichov tweeted that, quote, she might disappear for a while, unquote, and then set her account to private. She also scrubbed the website for her podcast. Hufford posted screenshots of many other racist and incendiary statements she made online. Now, here we go. Let's get down to the brass tacks. Let's get down to the meat and potatoes of the whole situation.
Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen so I can show you the comments that he's referencing as we go along. So bear with me 1 second. Just bear with me a second. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so I'm going to be able to show you the tweets that he is referencing in his video.
It isn't supremacist or hateful to prefer your own people over others. Where is it racist? If I was to say that, that wouldn't be racist. And in reality, it's not something you could consider racist. Because look, most people in the USA, other countries is different. I mean, actually, other countries is probably even more so what I'm about to say. But in the USA, people typically marry within their own race at about a 90 to 95% rate. It doesn't matter what race you are. If you're Asian, Hispanic, black, white, it doesn't matter. Everybody pretty much marries with each other. They pretty much stay amongst each other as far as where they live, where they go to school, where they hang out. You can go to a place and it's like segregated by ethnicity, country of origin, or just simply race, black, white, whatever. Like in Virginia Beach, if you're from Hampton Roads, you know what I'm about to say is true. You go to Virginia Beach, a certain part of town where it's pretty much just like China. It's Asia. Like right there on Lake Haven, on the corner of Land and Chris's End, it's all Asia right there. You got the Filipino stores. You got like 3 Filipino food stores right there. You got a Thai spot. You got a Chinese food spot. And then you go to that Walmart, you can't tell if you're in China or America. I'm not being racist. I'm just saying the reality of the situation. And that little pocket right there is very Asian. And that's fine. It's okay. It's okay to want to be in an area where you feel comfortable. Same thing with New York. You got Haitians over here, Jamaicans over here. It's not even really a race thing in New York. It's more about a country of origin. Like I said, Haitians, Jamaicans, Africans, they all have their own little pockets. They kind of intermingle with each other, but they still have their own section of the city. Okay? And that's fine. That's okay. People do prefer to be amongst their own people over others. That's a fact. And let's get to the...
Okay, so I want to respond to that. You know, we're not talking about a situation where somebody just wants to marry among their own, or they have a preference for their own women or men or whatever. That's not what this particular tweet is about. This is more general. This is more broad. It talks about preferring your own people over other people. And when you look at that in an employment context, for instance, where a white employer prefers to hire their own over other people, that's called discrimination. That's illegal behavior. When you look at a community, for instance, that decides that they don't want to allow African Americans into that community, that is called housing discrimination. That's what that is. And that is hateful. That is racist. That is a part of white supremacy. When you prefer your own. And then when we look at preferring your own in the criminal justice context, there's a preference for these white people in the criminal justice system. When we look at sentencing, how white people receive lighter sentences than African Americans. And when we look at the war on drugs, how they created the disparity between crack and powder cocaine, we see that this preference has a very real impact on Black people's lives. That disparity between crack and powder cocaine is a racial disparity. They saw that it was Black people who were using and selling crack cocaine in larger numbers than white people. And they saw that powder cocaine was a drug used by more affluent white people and sold by more white people and stuff like that. So they decided to treat the two differently based on a preference for their own people over other people. That is called racism. That is called white supremacy. That is hate, despite the way that this guy tries to characterize it. You know, the fact that Black people were segregated out of certain communities through redlining, that is a form of institutionalized racism. That can't be brushed aside. And when we look at a situation like in Myrtle Beach, for instance, where you have a city, where you have a police department that has a preference for white people coming to the city over Black people coming to the city, where they treat Black people coming to the city, for instance, for a Black Bike Week, completely different than they treat white people, for instance, coming to that city for Harley Week. In one situation, they create a ridiculous traffic pattern that keeps people stuck in traffic for long periods of time, a 23-mile traffic loop designed to do nothing but discourage African Americans from coming to that city for Black Week because they don't like seeing all these Black people in their city, but they don't have that same traffic pattern during any other time of the year. That preference of white people over Black people is nothing but white supremacy, and it's nothing but hatred. And for this Negro right here to try to explain away these hateful comments, try to excuse it and justifies it, you know, that tells you how much this Negro suffers from Stockholm syndrome. So let's continue on. He's going to go through each one of these tweets and come up with excuses for these tweets. And I'm going to respond to each and every one of these excuses that this stepping fetching Negro tries to provide for this racism.
Next so-called offensive tweet here. You know, America's education system is designed to enable victimization when teachers are forced to learn about institutional racism and prove it's real when it isn't. I literally feel brain cells dying as I read this BS. Sunday morning, hashtag Sunday morning. Now, I'm looking over here because I have a monitor over here that's a little bit bigger. You know, I'm doing a 2-monitor setup, and I'm going to read this little portion. I'm just going to come out. Yeah, see right here where my mouse says, I'm going to read this portion right here and see what it says. It says, confronting racism in classrooms. A first step in confronting racism in schools is to realize that racism exists and that if teachers are white, they have benefited from it. This is not an easy process, as discussed earlier in the section on racial identity. We often resist discussion of race and racism because we must eventually confront our own feelings and beliefs. Most teachers believe that discrimination, and it goes on. But basically, it's saying, look, racism is real, and if you're white, that means you benefit from it. So basically, you're a racist. So you got to believe that. You got to teach that to your students, and that's pretty much what it is. Now, how would you feel if you were in that situation, have to read that to your students, knowing it's not real, knowing that you don't believe it? No, you're not a racist. You're not the kind of person that would fit into this, but yet you got to teach it regardless. I mean,
all right. So I want to start responding to that comment. First of all, nothing in here accuses people of being racist. Nothing in that quote that man read accuses anybody, you know, these teachers of being racist. It doesn't accuse them of racism. So this guy is essentially trying to turn the tables and trying to redefine what this tweet actually says, to change the words of this tweet in order to come up with some kind of way to explain away this stuff. You know, the fact of the matter is, institutional racism is real in our school systems on so many levels. You know, let's start with the most basic of levels. The fact that African American history is basically written out of the history that our children are taught. African history is written out of the history that our children are taught. When we go to school, I remember as a kid, in world history class in high school, reading about all these great civilizations, reading about the English, reading about the French, reading about the Greeks, reading about the Romans, reading about all these civilizations, but not reading about African civilizations, reading about all these contributions to history, but not reading about African contributions to history, reading about what all these white men accomplished and not reading about what Black people accomplished. Not reading about that. Basically being taught that Africa contributed nothing to human civilization. When they talked about Europe, when they talked about Egypt, they presented it as if it was a white civilization. The way they talked about Egypt, you would think that it was located in Europe. That's the history that our young people are taught. That is a prime example of institutionalized racism, where Black history is blotted out. And all you're given about Black history is that we were slaves, that we were under Jim Crow, and then they tell you a little bit here and there about the civil rights movement. That's all that you learn about African Americans in most high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. Rarely are they teaching about the accomplishments of African people. And we wonder why we have teachers like this woman who actually believe that Black people haven't contributed anything. They actually believe that Black people are less intelligent. And that brings me back to this whole point about intelligence. Here's a woman who's charged with educating Black students as well, even though this school that she taught at was predominantly white. She was teaching Black students as well. And this is a woman who believes that Black people are less intelligent. How does that manifest itself in the classroom? I'll tell you how it manifests itself. It manifests itself by these teachers putting Black students on a track towards failure instead of a track towards excellence and success. It becomes a situation of a self-fulfilling prophecy where they believe that Black people are less intelligent, so they track them to lower performing classes. They don't send them to the accelerated classes. They send them on a track that leads to nowhere. And that brings me back to other examples of institutionalized racism in the school systems and in society in general. I'll start off with just the school system. We look at the school to prison pipeline, where Black students are harshly disciplined in the school system to such a degree that many of them are directed towards the criminal justice system. We look at the situation of education disparities in terms of funding inequities between suburban schools, affluent suburban schools, compared to predominantly Black urban schools. That's a manifestation of institutionalized racism. When we look at the curriculum and how you have the white students push towards these accelerated programs, these talented and gifted programs, while Black students are pushed towards remedial programs, pushed towards underperforming classes. When we look at just the disparities in terms of the achievement gap in schools, that is a manifestation of institutionalized racism. And we could go on and on in terms of the criminal justice system, which I touched on earlier. We can talk about the massive wealth disparities between Black and white communities. We can talk about segregation being a product of years and years of redlining in communities. Institutionalized racism is very real. When we look at the sentencing disparities, when we look at the high incarceration rate in the Black community, all of that points to institutionalized racism. When we look at the death sentence that are imposed compared to those being imposed against Blacks and compared to white people being sentenced to death, we see all kinds of examples of institutionalized racism. We can look at the health system. how Black communities are underserved when it comes to healthcare, how Black people end up dying from all these ailments at younger ages than other groups of people because of the disparities in healthcare. And I could go on and on. I could do an hour-long video just talking about institutionalized racism, but you have this teacher pretending that institutionalized racism does not exist, and you have this buck dancing Negro making all kinds of excuses to defend this woman. And that's a shame. And, this woman talked about it enables victimization, when you deal with institutionalized racism and all that kind of stuff. When the fact of the matter is, the textbooks, they would glorify these invaders. They would glorify Christopher Columbus, for instance, a man who committed genocide against the native people. They would make these people into heroes. They would glorify the slave masters, who were the so-called framers of this country, the founding fathers, who wrote about democracy while they enslaved Black people. I could go on and on, but let's move on to the next tweet that this guy wants to discuss.
How would you feel? It's crazy. And then here's another one that says, white privilege, prove to me that it exists. Show me statistics that prove whites benefit economically solely because of their race. And that is a very good question, because what about places in Europe where there was never any slavery, where there was never any colonization? You're talking about places like Finland. What about even places that were part of the former Soviet Union?
See, and that's a classic example of deflection. White privilege, when she raises this question of white privilege, she's talking about in America. She's not talking about all these foreign countries that are predominantly white that this guy tries to bring up. I mean, this guy is a deflection artist. He wants you to talk about these foreign countries when the issue is what's happening right here in America. The issue is this white privilege in America. That's the issue. And I've already cited examples of white privilege. We see white privilege every day in terms of, I'll just start with this example, in terms of how the police interact with citizens. We've seen video footage of how a white person can be confrontational with the police and live, but a Black person is confrontational with the police, ends up being a statistic. He ends up being a hashtag on Twitter. We see this all the time, how these police deal with Black people and white people completely differently. And when we look at the statistics, we see it there as well. How Black people, for instance, I think it was in 2005, the Washington Post did a report and a study about police brutality, and they found that although Black men make up 6% of the US population, they made up 40% of the unarmed people killed by the police. And we see example after example, and some of them I've already cited, but that one example proves this point of white privilege. We see white privilege all the time, but you had this guy trying to deflect and bring into a discussion about what's going on in these foreign countries when what we're talking about is America, a country that has a legacy of hundreds of years of slavery, a country that has a legacy of decades of Jim Crow, a country that just recently, when you look at it in the big scheme of things, just recently gave the African American civil rights after much struggle and much sacrifice. It's only been a little over 50 years since we've had so-called civil rights in this country. But yet you have this delusional Negro trying to deny the existence of white privilege. But let's continue on.
Yugoslavia, these places, a lot of places in Southern Europe are very poor. They're not even really considered first world countries, but they're doing better than places in sub-Saharan Africa, also Southeast Asia. So at a certain point, it's like, okay, what's going on? Why is places like Thailand in bad shape, or better yet, like parts of the Indian subcontinent, Bangladesh? Why places like that in such bad shape, but you go to Beijing and Shanghai, it's different. When you go to Tokyo, it's different. When you go to Seoul, South Korea, it's different. Why?
See, that whole discussion is completely irrelevant to the point about white privilege. That's what this guy does. He specializes in tap dancing around issues, specializes in deflection. He's a shameless panderer to these white conservatives who follow his channel.
And she also says, what does having compassion have to do with the fact that systemic racism and white privilege aren't real? Now, I can't see exactly what this tweet says as far as the part over here where it's, like a quoted picture. All right. And then I guess this person is talking about her. And they say this is the person that reaches 10,000 followers. Yeah, I'll stick with my several hundred followers who have hearts and compassion with an angry face with some hearts. That's funny. We also downloaded the episode of this week's podcast, which you can listen to here. Start at 1:30 for the aforementioned comments. Okay, matter of fact, let's go ahead and take a listen. I'm going to put my headphones on, and we're going to listen right now and see exactly what's happening. Let me turn my desktop audio on so we can hear.
Nepotism, and then before you know it's like it's all them and they're running everything, right. And all the curriculum's changing. But we have to take those institutions back. Children is very important, and communists always knew that. They always wanted the minds of children because that is the future. So if we can have more teachers in those positions, that would be great. And you know what? I do hear from teachers all the time, people that are closet Red Ice listeners and that support what we do.
Oh, Red Ice. Red Ice? No, okay. This ain't the same podcast, is it? Because I know who Red Ice is. That's people up in Sweden. Nah, they ain't. Oh, man. Red Ice? Nah, come on.
And I think that's fantastic. We need a lot more of that.
Oh, I'm absolutely one of them then.
Yeah, and I showed you all. I just want to stop for a second. I showed you all this video from Red Ice TV, railing against diversity, which is, something that these white supremacists do. And apparently this guy is familiar with Red Ice, so if he is familiar with it, he should know very well that that's nothing but a white supremacist platform. But yet and still, he still defends this stuff. And he still tries to gloss over that fact. But let's continue on.
Awesome. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. It's something that, as a teacher, it's a tough place to be. It's not nearly as, bloody as a battlefield, but it's pretty darn close because there's just so much animosity and so much bureaucracy surrounding you that you're fighting, you're on a very steep hill.
Yes.
And it's hard to make your way to the top of it when you're virtually alone. You might be incredibly lucky to find someone that's also, in the same mindset as you. But even then, it's still difficult to be fighting.
Okay. I will put that in the description box below if you want to hear it, but I don't want to play the whole thing here. Yeah, that's pretty real basic, white stuff. It's nothing really that deep. It's not like it's racist. There's black podcasts that are way worse than that, with teachers in it, people that work regular jobs, and nobody has a problem with it.
Yeah, see, there he goes again, deflecting to what black people are doing, trying to make black people the issue, trying to make black people the subject, and trying to make these white people seem like they're so innocent and, why is nobody picking on black people? And I already showed you an example of a black person that had a podcast or whatever who was fired for making what they labeled as racist and anti-gay statements on social media. So this guy, again, doesn't know what he's talking about. This guy, again, is doing nothing but pandering. And, the fact that he would dismiss this racism, this blatant racism as just white stuff is just nonsensical. It's asinine. And it's just frankly stupid. And I can't believe that these people actually believe that this guy is being frank and honest with these people. This guy, if I had to read his mind, I would say that he doesn't even believe half of the stuff he's saying. This guy is just saying this stuff because he knows that this is what those white conservatives want to hear. This guy has tailored his message to these people. That's why he has all of these subscribers, because they love the coon. They love the tap dancer. They love somebody that plays the role of stepping fetching. Just like they used to love those minstrel shows back in the day. They would laugh it up at the minstrel. They would clap for the minstrel. and celebrate the minstrel, just like how they celebrate people like him, just like how they celebrate people like those coons, Diamond and Silk, just like they do with these people. They love the coon. They love these people, and this guy knows it. And that's why he taps in to their sentiments, so he can get these views, so that he can get these subscribers, so that he can get this revenue from AdSense. This is nothing but an example of shameless pandering.
The reason why it's an issue is because the people are white, and it evokes some kind of fear. People are scared of white people that talk about being white and liking it. That's what that is. If it was somebody black, then there's no fear, because what are you going to do? You're not going to do anything. But I digress. The school where Volitich works is overwhelmingly white. In the 2015-2016 school year, nearly 90% of the school students identify as white, per the National Center of Education Statistics. Only about 4% of the students identify as black and 3% identify as Hispanic. Most of the school students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So where's white privilege at? If most of the school qualify for free or reduced lunch, yet 90% of the kids are white, then where's white privilege at? It doesn't make any sense. But let's keep going. Scott Herbert.
Now, he cited the example of students at this particular school being on free and reduced lunch, to suggest that somehow because of that, they're not privileged, as white people, because some of them happen to be low income. That means they're not privileged. First of all, this discussion about white privilege is larger than that particular school. It's about the overall society that privileges white people in all kinds of ways. All we have to do is look at the disparities in everything from education, from the criminal justice system, from the issue of wealth, when we look at health, when we look at all of these issues, they all point to the fact that white people have a degree of privilege in this country. And the fact that somebody is low income and all that kind of stuff, even a low income white person has privileges that a middle class black person or upper middle class or even wealthy black person does not have. And the fact that this Negro is so blind, deaf, and dumb that he can't see that is astonishing.
Executive Director of Educational Services for Citrus County School District could not confirm that Dalichov was Volitich, but said the district will be looking into the statement she made, checking the validity to see if they violate our code of ethics and policy. Quote, she does not speak on behalf of Citrus County School District. Herbert said the views she's listed online are really not in line with how our district operates. Okay, this is just a random little pop-up here on Huffington Post. It says, white supremacy won't follow just a few statues. White supremacy, what is that? What is that, though? If somebody out there listening to this, you can hear the sound of my voice, you can see me. What is white supremacy? I like to know.
So now this guy plays stupid, like he doesn't know what white supremacy is. And I read this definition earlier, and I'm going to read it again. And all he had to do was open up Google it. I mean, he knows what it is, but he's dancing around it so he could come up with a reason to explain away this woman's racism, so he could come up with a reason to excuse what she's doing. But again, a white supremacist is a person who believes that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races.
Know that. And how does it prevent you from being able to get up every day, brush your teeth, wash your hind parts, and get something to eat? You tell me. Tiana Dalichov didn't respond to Huffington Post's request for a comment.
So he's basically downplaying white supremacy to basically say, how does it prevent people from doing all these different things? Again, I won't repeat myself, but I cited various examples of institutionalized racism. And in terms of white supremacists and how they pose a threat to black people, all we have to do is look at the case of Dylan Roof, a white supremacist who went into a church and killed 9 innocent black people. All we have to do is look at the situation where white supremacists from Baltimore traveled all the way to New York so that he could kill some random black person. All we have to do is look at the situation at university here in Maryland, The University of Maryland, where a black student was on campus and a white supremacist killed him simply because he was black. How many more examples do we need to see in order to understand that white supremacy is a real threat to black people? There have been many reports about how white supremacists are the biggest threat in this country, the biggest terrorist threat. They're a bigger threat than ISIS. They're a bigger threat than Al-Qaeda. They have a long history of terrorizing black people, but yet you have this step-and-fetching Negro trying to downplay the significance of white supremacists and white supremacy.
On Facebook and Twitter on Friday, she had since deleted those social media accounts. Volitich did not respond to her post message to her school email address on Friday. Earlier this week, the blog Angry White Men, which tracks white nationalism, wrote a post about how someone named Tiana Dalichov had interviewed the prominent white supremacist media figure Lana Logan. That's from Red Ice. That's what we were just listening to a little earlier. On this week's episode of Unapologetic, Logan works for the media outfit Red Ice TV, which the SPLC recently designated as a hate group. Now, what makes Red Ice TV a hate group? Explain.
So you have the Southern Poverty Law Center, as he indicated. They indicate that this Red Ice TV is a hate group, and that's what Southern Poverty Law Center specializes in. They specialize in tracking various hate groups, and the fact that they have designated that group as a hate group, that speaks volumes. But yet you have this Negro trying to pretend like it's not a hate group. Yet you have this Negro trying to pretend like that podcast with somebody from Red Ice TV was not racist. It was not problematic at all. It was just white stuff. This guy is in denial. I can't believe that this guy is so stupid as to not see what's going on. And I don't think that he's that stupid. I think that what he's doing is putting on a show for these white folks.
Mention me that. Now, hopefully you have ISIS in there as a hate group, people that actually go out there and murder other people for no real reason. You tell me that. I've not heard about Red Ice TV engaging in any violence. All they do is just talk on a podcast, and that's it. As far as I know, if they do more than talk, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what they do just beyond having their talk show on the internet. In the episode, Tiana Dalichov talked openly about being a public school teacher, but didn't reveal her name or the school where she worked. Huffington Post found a website promoting the writing of Tiana Dalichov that had a bio section listing the author's home at Crystal City, Florida. Volitich is listed in public school records as residing in Crystal City. She is also listed as being 25 years old. This year, when a fan tweeted at Tiana Dalichov asking how old she is, she responded she's 25. Okay, we know who she is. It's not like, some big thing. Investigative journalism, great, but we already know what's going on. The point is she guilty of some kind of crime here? And that's what I want to know. What crime did she actually commit? Okay, there's not much more here in this. It just basically be trying to prove that she...
It's not about her committing a crime. That's not what it's about. It's about whether or not somebody that espouses these hateful views, somebody who supports white supremacy, someone who supports the idea that black people are less intelligent, somebody who supports the idea that there's something wrong with diversity. The question is whether or not that kind of person is suitable to serve as a teacher in a public school. That's the question. And that's the question that this guy is basically trying to avoid. That is the question that this guy is basically tap dancing around and trying to come up with excuses to try to explain away all those racist tweets, trying to explain away that racist podcast, just trying to explain it away. Doing the work of these white supremacists for them. It's like you don't even need white people to defend against these charges of racism when you have house Negroes like this Negro who are glad to play the role of the buffer Negro.
Is who she is, blah, blah, blah. Same old stuff. Oh, here's another tweet. And she says, Islam is responsible because it legitimizes the terrorist behavior and praises his actions. And I guess this is a response to this tweet right here underneath it. from a guy named Nathan Lean that says Islam is not responsible for today's attack at the Port Authority in New York. Muslims are not responsible either. One person, Akayet Yullah, is responsible, and only he must be blamed for his actions. Generalizing and stereotyping in the wake of these events is unhelpful and wrong. Now, here's my response to that. When you have a person that acts strictly out of his devotion to his Islamic faith, and you see the same pattern happen over and over and over and over again, at a certain point, when do you say that Islam is responsible? When do you say?
So I want to address that real quick. You know, this notion that Islam is responsible is ridiculous, because you have diversity in Islam just like you have diversity in any faith. You know, that's like saying that Christianity, for instance, is responsible for what the KKK does. You know, that's what that's like. Or saying that Judaism is responsible for what the Zionists do in Israel when they occupy the lands of the Palestinian and kill Palestinian people. See, generalizations have become acceptable when it comes to Islam, but for any other faith, whether we're talking about Christianity or Judaism, you make these types of generalizations and you will be demonized when it comes to Jews. For as we see what's happening with Farrakhan, which I've been discussing on my New Possibilities channel. But it's fine for people to make generalizations about Islam. You know, that's acceptable. When the fact of the matter is these people who are committing these acts of terrorism, they are acting in their political interests. They are trying to use religion as an excuse for what they do. When the fact of the matter is most Muslims do not condone terrorism. Most Muslims condemn terrorism. You know, Islam is not a religion that encourages violence against innocent civilians. But let's continue on. That could be a whole video. And for those of you who don't know, I'm going to do a response to someone who made an anti-Islamic video. Hopefully I'll be able to do that by tomorrow. So you all look out for that on my New Possibilities channel.
Say that. We need to reform the religion, banish it, or whatever. If you see somebody with a big beard, big backpack on, you're going to think terror, bomb, whatever. That's just what it is. So she's not wrong here. Everybody knows she's not wrong, but for some reason, we got to pretend like she is. Here's some more about the young lady. She has gushed about the work by anti-Semitic author Kevin McDonald and has said the JQ is incredibly complex. The JQ stands for the Jewish question, an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jewish people have undue influence over the media, banking, and politics that must somehow be addressed. That's not necessarily what the JQ is. The JQ is about, are Jews the cause of problems in the world or are they not? That's just from my point of view. But I guess depending upon who you are and who you talk to, it can be defined differently.
This guy is coming up with excuses for this anti-Semitic book, trying to come up with excuses for this woman supporting this anti-Semitic book. And, the fact of the matter is, like, anti-Semitism and racism go hand in hand. Like most of these white supremacists, like your David Dukes, like your alt-right, like your KKK, these people are anti-Semitic. Like anti-Semitism runs through their veins. And that anti-Semitism goes hand in hand with racism against Black people. It goes hand in hand with this xenophobia directed towards immigrants. But yet you had this Negro trying to make excuses for this. Because he knows his audience very well. He knows that most of his audience are nothing but these conservative white people who are borderline racist. And the only reason why they tolerate this Negro, the only reason why they are subscribed to him is because he's saying what they want to hear. You probably will never hear this Negro speak out against racism. You will probably never hear that because he will alienate his audience and he will have less subscribers if he did so.
And here's another tweet from her. I'm not being patronizing. I'm stating facts. And the JQ is incredibly complex. If you're truly open to exploring it, I'll send you some resources privately. Okie dokie. She has repeatedly praised, defended, and retweeted neo-Nazis and white supremacists, including David Duke, Arthur Jones, Patrick Casey, Mark Collette, and Mike Pinovich, and Mike, a.k.a. Mike Enoch. I don't know the other guys. I've seen them on Twitter. I don't really know. But David Duke, I mean, what makes David Duke a white supremacist? I don't really...
Did he have the nerve to ask that question? What makes David Duke a white supremacist? He actually had the nerve to ask that question. Let's do the history on David Duke. Let's go to his Wikipedia. Just bear with me a second. He said, what makes David Duke a white supremacist? As pointed out here, he's a Holocaust denier. As pointed out here on Wikipedia, he was a former Grand Wizard of the KKK, a terrorist organization. Let's continue on. This guy was a Klansman. You know, he actually ran for president. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a part of a group called the National Association for the Advancement of White People, another white supremacist organization, as indicated here. Yeah, it says that to end that he formed, like he criticized, you know, discrimination against white people or whatever, and he started a group called the National Association for the Advancement of White People, another racist organization. This guy, if I'm not mistaken, he was a Nazi at one point when he was in college. Yeah, so when he was in, his racism goes way back to 1968. He was at the Louisiana State University. He formed a white student group called the White Youth Alliance that was affiliated with the National Socialist White People's Party, a Nazi organization. And it says that he demonstrated in a Nazi uniform. He was picketing and holding parties on the anniversary of Hitler's birth. And not only has he done things in the past, he is a white supremacist today. Hopefully they had that information here about the white supremacist groups that he's affiliated with now. You know, this is a run through of all the hate groups that he's been affiliated with. You know, he's expressed support for these Holocaust denier groups. He was an active user on Stormfront, a racist white supremacist site. He has praised the alt-right movement. That's a recent movement, y'all, as you know, as most of you know. And it goes on and on, but yet and still, you had this Negro right here asking, how is David Duke a white supremacist? David Duke, if I'm not mistaken, he was at that Charlottesville rally with those white supremacists. Let's Google that real quick. If I recall correctly, he was on Vice TV. They had on the Vice program where they were covering Charlottesville. As you can see here, he was at the Charlottesville rally, and I'm not going to click this because I don't want to have to deal with copyright issues. But how much more evidence do you need to have to see that this guy, David Duke, is a white supremacist? But yet you got this guy playing stupid, pretending like he doesn't know that David Duke is a white supremacist. You know, he just glosses over the fact that he was a grand wizard and all that. But let's listen to this guy.
No, they said that he was to be in the Klan, but people in the Democrat Party were in the Klan as well. You had Robert Byrd, he was in the Klan, and he was a high-ranking member of the Democratic Party for 50 years. So did we just judge you based on your past, or can we look at...
Now he brings up this, I mean, this is another example of deflection. He wants to go into a discussion about this Democratic congressman who was a member of the Klan and this and that. How is that relevant to the question about whether or not David Duke is a white supremacist? And the fact of the matter is, Byrd, you know, despite his history of being a white supremacist, he later changed some of his views. But David Duke today is still the same white supremacist that he was back in his college days. The only difference is he has toned down his rhetoric. The fact of the matter is he still rails against diversity. He still supports the idea of separation. This guy is still a white supremacist. He was at that rally in Charlottesville. So that rally was not 100 years ago. That rally was not even 5 years ago. That rally took place last year. So this is not a situation where someone used to be a white supremacist and they reformed somehow. This man was on this coon Tommy Sotomayor's program espousing hatred and racism. But yet you had this fool right here, this buffoon, this Negro talking about questioning whether or not this guy is a white supremacist. I mean, how stupid do you think people are? Do you think people actually believe that you don't know that this guy's a white supremacist? I mean, the fact that his audience is so gullible that they actually believe that this guy believes what he's saying. They can't see through his clear and obvious pandering. And I'm just going to close on that note. I've had enough. I can't go through any more of his video. It's only a few minutes left, but I've had enough. But I'm going to go to your comments before I close out. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Again, you know, I want to make sure that everyone is clear. Let me stop sharing my screen. I want to make sure that everyone is clear. You know, I'm not one to just do these little response videos or whatever. You know, I would rather have a live exchange with this guy, have a live debate with this guy, and with anybody. You know, I would debate any of these people live. And, you know, we'll see whose ideas prevail just based on logic and reason. But this guy he's a disgrace, man. He's a disgrace to his race. You know, he is a coon. And, you know, the fact that he's defending somebody that actually thinks that black people are less intelligent, that just tells you how lost that Negro is. But let's go into your comments. I'm going to look at your comments before I close out. Yeah, so Doug said, I can't wait for this debate. Yeah, I mean, as you all know, I didn't get a chance to actually debate him live, but hopefully I will at some point. Hopefully he'll man up and actually have a debate. You know, I don't mind if it's on O'Shea's platform or anybody else's platform, but I'll be happy to debate him live. I'll be happy to debate a David Carroll live or even a Tommy Sotomayor. I will debate any of these people on a platform that's neutral, you know, a neutral platform where it's fair. And, you know, I'm not going to a Tommy Sotomayor platform, but I will go on a neutral ground and debate him or anybody else. Yeah, so W. Parsons says, instead of fighting for power in an established political movement, this guy wants to please his reactionary audience. Yeah, that's exactly what he wants to do. Please his reactionary audience. And, you know, this person, KD84 said that Sambo probably is an all lives matter clown. Yeah, he probably is. And that kind of reminds me of something that O'Shea and his guests were saying on their hangout. They were talking about this woman, this black woman who actually wore a shirt saying white lives matter. Actually wore a shirt like that. Man, if I find out who that person is, if y'all know what that channel name is, please let me know. I'd love to check out that channel and just go in on that woman, man. You know, do some response videos over here. All right, so just bear with me, y'all. I'm just going through the. Doug said that ABL will take the debate now. You know, he said that he called him out on it too many times. And KD84 said black conservative equals laugh and joke. Pretty much. Pretty much, man. Because a lot of these guys, you can't really take them seriously, man. Because too many of them do nothing but pander to white people. Too many of them just make excuses for white supremacy. They make excuses for police brutality. So they can't really be taken seriously. They can't. And that's why so few black people are a part of that movement, because it's a joke. And most people can see right through it. And W. Parsons says, Nigerians who come to America are well educated and articulate. Lady doesn't know anything about Nigerians. That's a fact, man. A lot of them are well educated. You know, they excel. A lot of them are very successful in this country. That's a very good point. And shout out to Psycho. He said, I hate this dude. He be super cooning. Yeah, he's taking that cooning thing to a whole nother level, man. He's almost on the level of a Tommy Sotomayor, but he's not quite as bad as Tommy, man. I don't think it gets worse than Tommy, man. He's pretty bad, though. His language is not as foul as a David Carroll, but he's getting there, man. He's running. He's in the running for top coon, man. He needs one of those Coon Train Awards. Somebody needs to nominate him for one of Tariq's Coon Train Awards. Paul Hammond said, this coon makes me sick. Also said another Tommy Sotomayor. And W. Parsons said, nice lady. Yeah, that's how he described, that's how that guy ABL described that white supremacist. He described her as a nice lady. And Parsons also points out how even a conservative like Thomas Sowell attacks IQ tests. And he's a black conservative. But yet you had this guy trying to explain, justify these IQ tests, like not even challenging them at all, basically saying that it is what it is. And, this woman is basically right about black people being less intelligent than white people. Exactly, Psycho. I mean, how can someone try to teach kids when they believe that black kids are inherently stupid? Yeah, I keep hearing about that E.T. Williams guy. I haven't checked out his channel. There's no shortage of these coons on YouTube, man. I'm telling you. it's like a career for these people, man. They really, it's really something else, man, that you have these people that are able to gain on this audience and stuff like that, cooning and tap dancing and whatnot. It's a shame, man. And Parsons asked, does this guy understand the alt-right? Does he understand that he's a useful idiot? Who is he trying to win? Certainly not black people. Yeah, certainly not black people, man. He's not even considering black people when he speaks out because black people are not his predominant audience. It's only a few people that are, black that actually watch his stuff. Shout out to Shayna Thomas, and thanks for tuning in. Shout out to Ghost Rider. Sorry, I'm getting to your comments late. It's just hard to respond and look at your comments at the same time. Yeah, exactly, Parsons. That's the main issue, is a teacher teaching reactionary ideas in a public setting. I see Nagon11 said, I was just about to hit the gym, but I got to see some of this first. Yeah, I was about to hit the gym myself. I'm going to go to the gym right after I end this podcast. I was going to go first to the gym, but, now, I just had to do this video. I had to get it out of my system, man. That's how it is with these videos. Like, I get motivated to do something, and I just have to do it. Otherwise, I won't get around to doing it. And Major Shock Value says some black people are just a lost cause. You can't do anything for them. True. Yeah, and that's a good point, Parsons. Like, you had these Republicans that constantly want to present this idea that the Democrats are the KKK. They present this idea that the Democrats founded the KKK and all this and that. But these people fail to realize that what has happened in modern times is the parties have basically flipped. A lot of those so-called Dixiecrats who were part of the KKK, who were segregationists and white supremacists, they switched over to the Republican Party after the passage of civil rights legislation. After the Republican Party, with their Southern strategy, basically tried to pander to these white supremacists. So you had a lot of those Southern Democrats, those Southern racist, segregationist Democrats switch over to the Republican Party. And that's something that these Republicans, these black Republicans, try to gloss over and ignore. Yeah, these points should be debated live. And again, I challenged ABL to a debate. Yeah, so that's it, folks. I just felt the need to share my views about this. I want to shout out everybody for tuning in. Shout out to Elaine Lloyd for tuning in as well. So with that, I want to say peace and blessings to everybody. Look out for more videos on this channel. YouTube tried to say I didn't have enough viewership or viewer hours to maintain my partnership status over here on I Declare War. So you're going to see more videos over here. I want to get this channel back up to partner status, and I want to gain more subscribers to this channel. And for people who aren't subscribed to my channel, New Possibilities, I encourage you to subscribe to that channel as well. So with that, I'll say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. And send out the word, man. Send out the word that I challenge this guy, Anthony Brian Logan, to a debate live. I would debate him on O'Shea's channel. I would debate him here on my channel. I would debate him in a fair environment, an environment that's neutral. So with that, peace, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.